Okay, so if you're following the news at all right now, it's pretty hard to miss the headlines about India and Pakistan.
Things seem really tense.
Yeah, exactly. After that, that deadly attack in Pahalgam in Indian-administered Kashmir, well, things have escalated. We're seeing gunfire across the line of control again.
And diplomatic ties taking a hit, too, right?
Definitely downgraded. And, the really worrying part, the elephant in the room, is that these are two nuclear-armed countries.
Which raises the stakes incredibly high. The fear of a wider conflict is, well, it's palpable.
It really is. And that's why we wanted to do this deep dive today. It feels like a moment where understanding the background is crucial.
It's built on sort of long and complicated history, hasn't it?
Absolutely. So we've gone through a whole lot of material analysis from places like the Council on Foreign Relations, academic work, recent news reports trying to piece together the historical threads and the dynamics that keep this conflict going.
And our mission here, for you listening, is really to try and make sense of it all. We want to give you a clear picture of the India-Pakistan conflict, what's driving it, especially now with this current escalation.
But without, getting totally bogged down in every single detail, give you the core understanding.
Exactly. Focused and insightful, hopefully.
So to get a grip on now, we have to go back, right? Where does this story actually begin?
It undeniably starts with the Partition of British India in 1947. That moment, that division, created Muslim-majority Pakistan and Hindu-majority India.
A massive upheaval.
Huge. And right in the middle of it, geographically and politically, was the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. It was given a choice. Join India, join Pakistan, or theoretically try for independence.
And that choice, or the path to making it, is really the heart of the whole Kashmir issue, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The ruler at the time, the Maharaja, he initially wanted independence. Kashmir had this long history of its own identity, often distinct from the empires around it.
But things didn't quite work out that way.
No. He faced pressure, specifically an incursion by Pakistani tribesmen, Pashtun herders, really. So he turned to India for military help.
And the price for that help?
Accession to India. He signed the instrument of accession and Indian troops moved in, but Pakistan contested this immediately.
Which led directly to the first war between them.
Straight into the Indo-Pakistani War of 1947-48. It was fought over Kashmir.
And did that war settle anything?
Not really, no. It ended with a UN-brokered ceasefire in 1949, the Karachi Agreement, which established a ceasefire line.
The precursor to the line of control we hear about today.
Pretty much. It was meant to be temporary, pending a final settlement, but, well, here we are. And that wasn't the end of the fighting, of course.
No, there were more wars. 1965.
Yes, another major war largely focused on Kashmir started after a border clash escalated.
And then 1971, which was different, wasn't it? More about East Pakistan.
Exactly. The 1971 war was primarily about the conflict in East Pakistan. India intervened decisively on the side of Bengali nationalists.
Resulting in the creation of Bangladesh.
Yes. A huge geopolitical shift. And after that war, there was another attempt to sort things out.
The Simla Agreement.
Right. In 1972, India and Pakistan signed the Simla Agreement. This agreement, it reaffirmed the commitment to resolve issues peacefully, and importantly, it converted the 1949 ceasefire line in Kashmir into the line of control, the LOC.
So kind of formalizing the division on the ground, but still not a final border.
Precisely. It reflected the actual positions held by the armies. But then, just 2 years later, something else happened that fundamentally changed the whole equation.
India's nuclear test.
India tested its first nuclear device in 1974, codenamed Smiling Buddha. They called it a peaceful nuclear explosion, but...
Everyone knew what it meant.
Right. It kicked off a nuclear arms race in South Asia. Pakistan felt compelled to develop its own capability to counter India.
Which they eventually did in 1998 after India conducted further tests.
Correct. So by 98, both countries were openly nuclear powers, a whole new level of danger.
Okay, so that's the historical arc. Wars, agreements, the nuclear factor.
Yeah.
But what are the persistent things, the core drivers that keep this conflict alive today?
Well, number one, without a doubt, is still Kashmir. It remains the absolute core issue.
The positions haven't really changed much.
Fundamentally, no. India views Jammu and Kashmir as an integral, inseparable part of India. Full stop.
While Pakistan
continues to support the idea of self-determination for Kashmiris, usually advocating for a plebiscite, a vote, as was initially suggested by the UN decades ago, to let the people decide their own future.
And the line of control just remains this sort of de facto, heavily militarized dividing line.
Exactly. A provisional border reflecting this deep, unresolved dispute.
And layered on top of the Kashmir issue is this power imbalance between the two countries, right?
Absolutely critical. There's a significant asymmetry. India is much larger geographically, has a vastly bigger economy, a larger population, and crucially, a more powerful conventional military.
How has Pakistan tried to deal with that imbalance over the years?
Historically, they relied on external balancing alliances, particularly with the U.S. during the Cold War, seeking military aid. More recently, especially post-Cold War, and as India's conventional advantage grew, Pakistan shifted more towards internal balancing.
Meaning things like developing their own weapons systems.
Exactly. Most significantly, developing nuclear weapons as the ultimate deterrent to offset India's conventional superiority.
It's interesting you mentioned the post-Cold War shift. Did the gap widen then?
It did, quite significantly. India really focused on economic liberalization and growth, boosting its global standing. Pakistan's trajectory was, well, more complex, often facing economic challenges and maintaining a very military-centric approach to security.
So this imbalance influences strategy. Pakistan might feel it needs unconventional methods.
That's a key point leading into the nuclear aspect and asymmetric warfare. The perceived need to counter India's size and conventional strength drives much of Pakistan's strategic thinking.
Which brings us squarely back to the nuclear arsenals. You can't talk India-Pakistan without it.
It's the grim reality hanging over everything. We're talking about estimates vary slightly, but roughly India around 164 warheads, Pakistan maybe closer to 170.
And their policies differ too, don't they? India's no first use.
Well, India had a stated no first use policy, meaning they wouldn't initiate nuclear use. But there's been official talk in recent years about potentially reconsidering that, which adds uncertainty.
And Pakistan.
Pakistan has never adopted a no first use policy. In fact, their doctrine seems to rely on nuclear weapons, including tactical battlefield nukes, precisely to deter an Indian conventional attack. They maintain ambiguity about the threshold.
Tactical nukes, smaller yield, meant for battlefield use. That sounds incredibly dangerous in terms of escalation.
Hugely dangerous. The risk of miscalculation or escalation from conventional fighting to nuclear use is terrifyingly real. Studies predict even a limited exchange could kill millions instantly.
Not to mention the potential for a nuclear winter affecting the whole planet.
Billions could be at risk from famine. The stakes are almost unimaginably high.
Given that conventional imbalance we talked about and the nuclear backstop, how else does Pakistan try to exert influence or counter India? This leads to the issue of militant groups, right?
Yes, the use of asymmetric warfare. Pakistan has long been accused by India and others of using non-state actors, militant groups, as proxies.
To fight a covert war, essentially.
To bleed India, to keep pressure up, particularly in Kashmir, without triggering a full-scale conventional conflict. Groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed Jem.
With alleged links to Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI.
That's the allegation, yes, that the ISI provides support, training, direction. These groups have been blamed for major attacks inside India.
Like the Mumbai attacks in 2008.
A horrific example. Also, the attack on the army base in Uri in 2016 and the Pulwama bombing in 2019, which killed dozens of Indian paramilitary police.
Which nearly brought them to war again in 2019.
It did. There were cross-border airstrikes, an Indian pilot was captured. It was extremely tense.
And this pattern seems to continue with the recent Pahalgam attack.
Indeed. India is blaming Pakistan-backed militants. An online group claiming to be a late offshoot, the Kashmir Resistance, reportedly claimed it.
But Pakistan denies involvement.
Vehemently denies it. They've called it a potential false flag operation by India and are asking for a neutral investigation. It's the familiar cycle of attack, accusation, and denial.
So even when there isn't a major attack, the border itself, the LOC, is constantly active.
It is. Ceasefire agreements, like the one renewed in 2003 and reaffirmed in 2021, often break down. Exchanges of small arms fire, sometimes mortar shelling, are common.
Both sides blaming the other for starting it.
Always. There was a particularly bad period of violations between 2016 and 2018, but it really never completely stops. And reports say it's been happening daily since the Pahalgam attack.
Now, another factor that's really heightened tensions recently is India's own actions within Kashmir, specifically regarding Article 370.
A huge development. In August 2019, the Indian government unilaterally revoked Article 370 of its constitution.
Which gave Jammu and Kashmir a special status, some autonomy.
Exactly. It removed that special status, split the state into two union territories directly administered by New Delhi, effectively diminishing its autonomy.
How was that received?
It was met with widespread anger among many Kashmiris and condemnation from Pakistan. India imposed severe lockdowns, communication blackouts, arrested political leaders.
Part of a strategy to integrate Kashmir more fully into India.
That appears to be the goal, yes, driven partly by the Hindu nationalist ideology of the current government. Subsequent actions, like redrawing electoral maps, seem aimed at consolidating central control, but it has definitely deepened resentment and alienation for many in the valley and further strained ties with Pakistan.
Okay, so that brings us to the immediate situation, the fallout from the Pahalgam attack. It feels like a rapid series of tit-for-tat measures.
It does, a dangerous escalation spiral. India announced it's suspending the Indus Waters Treaty.
Wow, that's a big deal. That treaty has held for decades, managing river water sharing.
It's crucial, especially for Pakistan's agriculture. Suspending it is a massive step. India also stopped visa-free travel for Pakistanis via a specific corridor and closed a border crossing.
And Pakistan's response?
They've rejected the treaty suspension, calling it potentially an act of war. They closed their airspace to Indian flights, stopped special visas for Indians, and suspended trade.
So diplomatic and economic measures, but what about militarily?
That's also escalating. There are reports of India conducting missile tests. Pakistan says it believes an Indian attack is imminent and has reinforced its border forces.
And India giving its forces complete operational freedom.
That's the reported language, yes.
Uh-huh.
It suggests a high state of readiness and potentially a lower threshold for military action. It's very worrying.
And we shouldn't forget the internal dynamics feeding into this, right?
Definitely not. In Pakistan, the military establishment holds significant sway over foreign and security policy, particularly regarding India. Their perspective is crucial.
And in India?
The current government's Hindu nationalism, its strong stance on national security in Kashmir, certainly plays a role in its calculations and public rhetoric. Domestic politics always matters in these situations.
Let's just briefly circle back to the nuclear aspect again, specifically the origins and the policies. It really highlights the stakes.
Right. As we said, India's 74 test was the trigger. Their motivation was complex security concerns after the '62 war with China, and China becoming a nuclear power. So India felt it needed a deterrent against both China and Pakistan.
And Pakistan's motivation was more singular, focused on India.
Primarily, yes. After losing East Pakistan in '71, feeling conventionally outmatched by India, and perhaps not having ironclad guarantees from allies, developing a nuclear deterrent became seen as essential for national survival, the ultimate equalizer.
And the policy differences, India is maybe reconsidering no first use versus Pakistan's explicit reliance on nuclear weapons, including tactical ones, as a warfighting tool almost.
That difference is stark. Pakistan's posture is often described as aiming for full-spectrum deterrence, including tactical nukes to counter even conventional threats. India's potential shift away from NFU adds another layer of instability.
And again, the catastrophic potential can't be overstated.
No.
Millions dead, nuclear winter.
It bears repeating. It's the backdrop against which all these skirmishes and political moves are happening.
You mentioned the post-Cold War shifts earlier.
Yeah.
How did that era change the dynamic?
Well, India really leaned into economic reforms, globalization, its economy took off, its international relationships broadened, particularly with the U.S.
While Pakistan's path was different?
Pakistan remained more focused on its military posture, security challenges, particularly Afghanistan. The 9/11 attacks profoundly reshaped its relationship with the U.S. initially as a key ally in the war on terror, but it became a very complicated partnership.
Did that indirectly benefit India sometimes?
Arguably, yes. As U.S.-Pakistan relations became strained over issues like drone strikes and sanctuary for militants, U.S.-India ties grew stronger, economically and strategically. Pakistan also faced persistent economic difficulties.
And the military's role in Pakistan remained strong.
Yes, the military continues to be a very powerful institution, influencing policy, contrasting with India's generally more robust civilian control, though with a strong nationalist government now.
So bringing it all together to the present moment, things sound exceptionally fragile.
They really are. This latest escalation after Pahalgam seems to have pushed relations to a new low, even by recent standards.
Are other countries trying to calm things down?
There have been calls for restraint, yes. The U.S. has urged de-escalation. China has also weighed in, interestingly suggesting that independent investigation into the attack.
But ultimately, the drivers are internal and bilateral.
Largely, yes. Domestic political pressures on both sides can fuel tensions, making it harder to back down. When you combine the unresolved core issue of Kashmir, the stark power imbalance, the history of conflict, the use of proxies, and overlay it all with nuclear weapons.
It's a recipe for extreme volatility.
Precisely. It's one of the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints on the planet.
So just to wrap up then, we've traced this back to partition in 47, seen how Kashmir became and remains the central, incredibly sensitive issue. We've talked about the nuclear danger, the power asymmetry driving strategies like asymmetric warfare, and how recent events like the Article 370 change and this latest attack have led to a really alarming escalation.
That covers the key threads, I think. And it leaves you with a tough question, doesn't it? Given this deep history, this entanglement, the current brinkmanship,
Yeah.
what are the realistic ways forward?
Towards de-escalation, let alone sustainable peace.
Yeah. It's hard to see easy answers. What role can international actors play? But maybe more importantly, what needs to change within India and Pakistan themselves to break this cycle?
Definitely something to think about. And if you, listening, want to dig deeper, maybe look into the specifics of that Indus Waters Treaty, its history is fascinating, or the details around Article 370 and its impact.
Or try to find accounts from Kashmiris themselves, understand their perspectives amidst all this.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into a very complex and concerning situation.